All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Save Time and Money with Wireless Utility Meters. My name is Gavin Wadsworth, and I'm with the marketing team at ResNexus. Thank you all for being here, and we're very excited to hear from Wild Energy on emerging trends in energy use, conservation, and metering. Presenting for you today is Mike Sorensen from Wild Energy. He'll speak for a period of time, after which we will have a Q&A, so have your questions ready for that time. And that being said, thanks so much for being here, Mike, and I'll go ahead and let you take it away.
Super, thanks, Gavin. Thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and Wild Energy and metering, and we'll get into some data. So lots of stuff to cover, and as Gavin mentioned, we'll have the Q&A at the end. You're always welcome to put your questions in the chat window as well for us so we can get to those questions. So I founded Wild Energy, and I'm a technology guy, so that's kind of where the root of it all came from. I've got a software development background, and I've been in multiple different industries, and this is actually my second startup company. So it's something that I just love to do. If I see a problem or I see an opportunity, I love to jump right in there and try to figure out how to use technology for business benefit. So that's a little bit about kind of where I come from. And now a little bit about where the idea came from. So I used to be an avid camper with my, I had a pretty good sized Class C, and we'd go camping on the weekends and, you know, week-long type trips. And it was interesting to go into these campgrounds, and I would plug in, and one weekend we had a whole bunch of friends come camping and had multiple spots. And one of the couples we were camping with set up this big tent, and I watched them walk over and plug their iPhone into the pedestal to charge it. And I said, hold on a second, we're getting free energy here in our big, you know, Class C with the refrigerator and the air conditioners and everything we want to use. And we paid the same amount for the tent and the pop-ups and everybody else that's around us camping at this same campground. And it just didn't ring well with me that, you know, everybody's paying the same amount, and yet we're getting this energy commodity and can use as much as we want, obviously, and figured that, hey, everybody has to chip in and pay this, you know, help pay for that energy. So, you know, and we see campground owners try to set their rates to include electricity, and you know, they have to obviously set the rates to cover all the electricity. And it's really the little guys that are you know, chipping in or paying the bill for the people that are using a lot of the energy. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this presentation as well. So then you know, I took my technology spin to it and said, hey, I can solve this problem. We can measure that energy. We can bill that back to people. And that's, you know, that's really where the idea was born, sitting around the campfire with my kids and talking about energy. So I mentioned we're going to cover a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about this problem a little bit deeper, talk about all the measurement, what goes on when you put metering in, how the demand is continuing to increase electrically across campgrounds, what we're doing with the data. We're getting a lot more data on energy usage now and what we're doing with that data. We'll talk about some of the trends and what new parks are doing as far as energy goes. And then we'll talk about the integration and how we take this integration and make it useful with ResNexus and down to the consumer. So I kind of described this problem, and it's really one that I call it the unseen problem, because people aren't even aware of it. I'll go out and I'll install meters, and you know, the campers that are sitting right next to the pedestal, like, oh, we're getting metering. And then once I explain that, hey, you use a different amount of energy than this guy next to you, then, you know, do you want to be paying for the EV that just plugged into next to you? The consumers all of a sudden get it. They're like, oh, you're right. Yeah, we didn't even think about that. That's all blended into the rate, and that, you know, we're all really paying for that energy. And so there is really a big disparity there between consumers and their equipment and how much energy they're using. And you can talk about golf carts and electric bikes and, you know, all the things that are showing up at campgrounds now. But, you know, we use this slide to just say, hey, that Class A Prevost there is using a lot different amount of power than the pop-up or the small travel trailer, et cetera. And I think the other thing that owners don't recognize right out of the gate is that Prevost bus you see right there uses as much energy as an electric vehicle. So everybody is like, hey, I don't want EVs plugging in. They're going to use too much energy. But now that we're measuring and collecting data, we've seen that, you get a big Class A like that with the 3 air conditioners and the washer and the dryer, residential washer and dryer, residential refrigerator. And in this case, this is a real one that we measured. This one had an electric cooktop. So when they'd flip that range on and they were cooking on the electric cooktop, they were drawing a lot of power out of that Prevost. So kind of interesting what we're seeing with the data that we're collecting. So let's talk a little bit about electric vehicles because we are seeing them show up. And it's interesting what people are doing with their EVs. They're putting hitches on them and they're towing things and they're going into campgrounds. And so we're definitely seeing more and more of them, and we can spot them pretty well with the electric metering. They do draw a high amount of electrical consumption, and I'll show you some of the data that we've captured on that. We're going to start seeing more of these electric RVs that you see there. We'll see them in the Class B units. Those are the easy ones to convert. They're not as heavy. They can put batteries. And so they're testing those on the road today and letting people take those into campgrounds. But that electric RV, has a single plug. So when it comes to a campground, it's going to pull into its spot, plug into the pedestal, and the first thing it's going to do is recharge the vehicle battery. And that same battery is what's being used to power the rest of the RV. So they won't have propane in those RVs anymore. Everything will be electric. The electric stove, electric refrigerator, all the appliances in there will be electric. So I have not yet caught one of those in one of the Wild Energy campgrounds yet, but we are watching them and seeing them at shows and are expecting them to pop up and show up in the campgrounds shortly. So let's dig into metering and measurement and some of the data that we're seeing out there. So this is an example from last year. We now have year-over-year data, and we can start using this data to spot trends. And this is a campground that did not have meters. They added meters into their campground. And so what we did was we were able to collect that July data there on the left and tell the campers, hey, this is what your bill would be when we start metering and we start billing you. So we kind of gave them a month's head start or notice on what they were using. And so July was the test run, so to speak, without billing, sample bills out to the consumers. And then they knew August 1st they were going to get real bills and start paying for their electricity. And you can see immediately, month over month, and we actually correlated weather in this case to make sure weather wasn't a factor, and number of days camping. So the good news is they had the same number of weekends. They both had holidays. The temperatures were, within a degree or two of average from each other. And we saw a 33% reduction in the electrical demand. And that 33% has held pretty consistent as we put meters into parks. The demand drops. As soon as you shift that accountability over to the consumer and they're paying and they're accountable for that, they start conserving. And it goes back to even when I was camping. I would have the air conditioning on and the kids would run in and out of the camper, and it didn't really matter if they left the door open because it was not gonna affect my bill at the campground one way or the other. So in this case, we see this very regularly as we put new meters into campgrounds that were previously unmetered. It is 25 to 30% reduction every single time. And I would say that it then goes up, and I'll show you that in the next slide here, what happens to the demand. So even though we're conserving, we are seeing the demand go up. So as I mentioned, we have year-over-year data now, and I've put up a couple of examples here on the screen from parks in Kansas and another one in Indiana. So you'll see, even though we had a overall reduction initially in the use of electricity, the demand still continues to creep and rise. And this is true whether the campground had meters before or did not have meters. The demand continues to go up. We see that across the board. And you can kind of see what an average bill looks like for the different campgrounds that we were monitoring. One was July, one was August. So those are warmer months with air conditioners running. And that's an average. We do see bills go anywhere from 20 bucks all the way up to 300, 350. You know, we've seen some really, really high electrical usage. And some of them really just don't care. They're out there using their, using their RVs the way they want to. And if they want the door open, they leave the door open. It doesn't matter to them. So, and that goes back to, each consumer is different and is going to use a different amount of power. So if you have somebody sitting out there on a monthly site using $350 worth of electricity, that's a big deal. Let's dig into the data on EVs. So we were able to track one user or owner who had a site with a small travel trailer, and then they bought an EV. And so we were able to track then what happened at that site once they came back and started using the EV on the 22nd of August. And so you can kind of see here in the graph that they were pretty average in I would say the low 20 kilowatts a day of electric usage. And then as soon as they got that EV, their demand just went up and up, and it drug that average up. So you can see they were hitting 100 kilowatt days, and their overall average has gone up by more than double. So that's kind of what's going on. And again, if you have a guest in one site, you want them to be paying for their electric usage and not have everybody else in the campground subsidizing that. The demand on those electric pedestals is also way different once you have these high consumers of energy. And this goes back to even the Prevost. I'm using the EV as an example here because it's really easy to illustrate. So you can see the camper, the small travel trailer, used about 8.5 amps of power to run air conditioning and the other appliances they had on. And then once they started charging their electric vehicle in the evening, the consumption and the overall drain on the electrical infrastructure jumps up dramatically. So it sits there and hovers. That EV is probably using 40 amps continuous to charge, and then everything above 40 amps is probably the camper there pulling on it for other things. And so it's not atypical to see that type of demand once you start plugging in these other high load consumers of energy. So you really need to know if your pedestals can handle that. They may even go higher than this. It depends on what equipment they have on site. But you're going to have higher demand for longer periods of time as we see these electric vehicles and ERVs show up. And the graphs on the right there speak to the averages that we were talking about. So they were averaging 22 kilowatts before they bought their EV, and then they were more than double that average after they bought that EV. So very interesting what we're able to see with the data. And we're using this data in many ways. And we give this data back to the campground owners so that they can plan for electrical upgrades, infrastructure upgrades, pedestal upgrades, whatever they need to do to support, their guests and their consumers coming into the campground. So the other thing we do with the data is we can do alerting. So we're getting this data real time from the electric meters now. It's not batch overnight. It's not every 6 minutes. It's literally real time. Every minute we know what that meter's doing. And so we are able to do things like alerting. If you have pedestals that just aren't designed or aren't rated for that type of load, we know when that load is applied to the pedestal. And that gives you the opportunity to go out to that consumer and say, hey, this pedestal is not meant for charging. You're going to need to do that up in the front of the park, or whatever it might be. So you can engage that consumer in a dialogue, talk about the cost, talk about the bill that they're going to get. We'll talk a little bit about the integration with ResNexus and how you can give allocation of power. So if they're going to exceed their allocation of power for their daily stay, hey, you're now going to get a bill for that, for the energy you're using above and beyond the allocation that we've given you. We also can use this data and this insight to detect outages. So we know when there's a problem at that pedestal. And it does happen. So we're probably dealing with an issue at a park every week for sure right now. So we're calling up a park and saying, hey, you've got an issue at this site. You need to, have somebody take a look at it. And then also, having this data helps kind of reduce that overall maintenance. If people are sitting there hitting hard on your breakers, you're going to end up replacing those if they're, if that's not a site that's designed to handle that load. We've seen electrical fires inside some of these pedestals. So having this insight into what's going on in the park electrically can really help drive the service side of things, keep your sites, running. So if you don't want a pedestal that's down and you got to move that guest or refund them because you don't have a place to put them, it gives you a little bit of proactive insight into what's going on in the park. And then I mentioned earlier, but we are able to then see what's happening at those sites. So I can tell immediately when one of these EVs or electric RVs plug in, because we see in the data, we see that demand go spike way up and then just run continuously. So we see that and we put that on our dashboard, and you can see that, which sites are high demand, high users. That goes back to being able to mark sites as ready for EVs. So you may only allow one EV per leg in your campground, and you can move those spots around. So when somebody's booking a site online, they can search for a site that is EV ready, and that can be an amenity type that you can offer to your guests, that they can pick one of the sites that, yep, we allow EV charging at that site. And so we can help kind of spotlight where you want to have that, where you're drawing too much on your electrical infrastructure. So speaking about infrastructure, I'm going to talk a little bit about what new parks are doing. They're obviously, if you're building a new park today, you are not building to yesterday's standards. And we have a good partner here in Florida that's building a huge park, 700 sites, and we're out there quite a bit testing our new stuff. But the overall design for that park is way bigger transformers. So I was talking to the utility guys the other day when I was out there, and they said, yep, these are the biggest land-based transformers we can put on the ground for this park. So they, they've had to order bigger transformers. They're putting larger wiring in the ground because they know the demand is going to be there in the future. They're not putting the wire in the ground today to service today. They're putting the wire in the ground to service what's going to happen over the next 20 years. They don't want to re-dig it up and have to upgrade that wiring. So, they're putting that in now so that they can handle what the demand is going to be in the future. They are allowing EV charging at the site. So with those larger transformers and the bigger wire and additional receptacles, they're allowing EVs at the site, and they are making that one of their amenity types. These sites are available for EV charging. You'll notice there that I put down, they're putting in larger pedestals, 50, 50, 30, 20. So there's an extra 50 amp receptacle with that pedestal. Obviously the wiring size to support that, because that is a larger pedestal. And then there's other strategies you can use when you're putting in this much demand and capacity. Obviously most pedestals are usually put in the back of the pad because that's where the EV or the RVs plug in. But if you have an RV and an EV and they both need to connect to that pedestal, now you might relocate that pedestal to the midpoint or closer to the front of the pad so that you can share it both ways, towards the back for the RV and toward the front for an EV. Or in the case of this Florida site we're working with, they've actually split off that second 50 receptacle and put a plug in the front of that pad for EV charging. So a lot of different strategies here, but as you're putting in new infrastructure or you're planning to upgrade, you want to plan for tomorrow, not what the standard is for today. Digging into metering a little bit, we're seeing that campgrounds are now changing their policies, no longer including electricity in their rates. And the analogy I give there is, hey, you don't let people walk into your store and just take candy bars. You don't have firewood out there and just let people take whatever they want. Those are other types of commodities that are available for the campers, and you charge for them. So electricity is really no different. It is a service that the camper can choose to use or not use, and they should pay for that. And as we see the rates, change across the country, that becomes a bigger and bigger issue every day. And we see campgrounds that have, electric bills of $250,000 plus. It's a lot of money. So you want to be capturing that, obviously, and you don't want that digging into your margin. So that's where you make it more of an expense type item. We see the campgrounds billing for shorter stays. And like we mentioned, if somebody pulls in with an EV and they're going to be charging that electric vehicle and using more demand, you don't want to just say, oh, okay, you're here for 2 nights and go ahead and plug your EV, and you probably are not making money on that guy. They're pulling more energy out of your infrastructure than they're paying to stay at your park. And EV owners actually know that. So they search out they search out campgrounds with low rate and electric included. That's the way to go. Pull in there and charge up for free. And as one of my campground owners says, I didn't build a gas station. That's not why I'm here. I'm not trying to get people to find me at the lowest electrical cost to charge their cars. That's not my goal. So we do see campgrounds switching to billing for shorter stays. And as I mentioned earlier, there's ways with ResNexus to include an allocation of power. And once they exceed that allocation of power, you can obviously charge for overages. And then finally, ResNexus pulls that data right in. So it makes that billing really seamless. They are reading our meters and using our API in real time. So when somebody checks in, it pulls the meter and says, okay, I know what was on the meter when they checked in. And then obviously when they check out, they pull the meter reading and they know exactly what the meter said on checkout. So it takes the hassle out, because you're obviously not going to run out to a meter for a day stay or an overnight stay and read the meter, or even a week. Most people don't want to run out and read a meter for a week-long stay. So that integration and that real-time transfer of data between the electric meter and the reservation system and the billing system is really important. So Gavin, that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. Maybe we can dig in a little bit on ResNexus integration and kind of what you guys do and how you build that out and how you make that simple for the owners, and field any questions.
Great, yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Mike. And yeah, like I said, at this time, we will now open up for questions. So go ahead and submit those in the questions section. We'll get those answered for you. If you do have any questions regarding the ResNexus side of the integration, then we also have Casey Gibson, who will be able to answer those via text. In the meantime, I would just like to remind everyone that if you liked this webinar and would like to view more ResNexus webinars, you can do so by navigating to the Education tab in resnexus.com and then to the Webinars section. And from that page, you can view all of our past webinars and also register for upcoming ones. All right, Mike, we do have a few questions for you already from our audience. Are you ready for them?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, awesome. So our first question is, I guess, more of a technical thing. Can an EV plug into my 50 amp RV pedestal?
Can or should is two different questions. So can is yes. Most EVs come with an adapter so that they can plug into that 50 amp outlet. It comes standard in their kits. They can get them on Amazon. So it converts their plug to a 50 amp. That 50 amp receptacle is kind of the same thing that most people put in their homes. So when they get home with their EV, that's usually what they're plugging into, is one of those types of receptacles. So they absolutely can plug into the 50 amp outlet on the pedestal. Now going to the question of should, and that is really, you need to know your electrical infrastructure. Was that pedestal wired to support that much load? So we do have campgrounds that cannot support that load. And again, that's what our alerting does. It alerts them that, hey, somebody's plugged in with something really heavy here, and allows them to go out and see what's going on. And we do see that tripping the breakers. So when they got both their EV and their RV plugged into a pedestal that was only wired for a combined total of 50 amps, it will usually blow a breaker somewhere or start melting the wire. So it is an interesting issue. And I always advise people to understand their electrical infrastructure better now that we're kind of transitioning to electric vehicles.
Right. I think as a follow-up question for that, someone asked, what's the best way to know what load your equipment can handle? Can an electrician determine that pretty easily?
Yes, they can. And I'll take this two different ways. So yes, you do need an electrician to know how it's been designed. So there are pedestals that are home run or single run back to the main panel, and that usually gives better load capacity. And then there's designs where they daisy chain pedestals together. They'll do underground wiring, and it goes to one, then it goes to the next one. So an electrician would be able to help you identify how you've been wired and how much capacity each of those legs can handle, to know whether you can plug them in or not. So I think that answers that question. And I forget where I was going to go with the second half of that.
That's all right. Do you want me to rephrase that too, or are you good?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, all right. Next question is, I think you may have already partially answered this one, but can the meters prevent EV charging on the campsites, or would they alert owners of high usage?
Yeah, they're not designed to prevent it. You could do that. It would be very expensive. So there are meters that will shut off. So if you did have a high load, we could send a signal and shut the meter off. But I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's a huge expense for little gain. So right now, alerting is the best way to handle it, and through your policies. So you can mark your pedestals that are not ready for EV charging. Say, you can put a sticker on there and say, hey, this is not rated or ready for an EV charging, to kind of just in advance warn people that it's not rated for that type of load.
Right. I think also in that same vein, someone asks, if there's a campsite that's not currently being used, will there be an alert if the system detects power is being drawn from that pedestal?
That's a good question. Yes. So part of the integration is what we call the check-in, check-out. So when somebody checks into a site, that flags that site as checked in, and Wild Energy knows which sites are checked in and which ones are not. And we can generate alerts on sites that are not checked in, so they're supposed to be vacant, and alert people that, hey, there's energy being drawn. And I'll go on a quick tangent here. We have a campground in Key West, Florida, that we work with, and we got an energy alert from one of their sites. And I got on the phone with the owner. I said, hey, what's going on site 5? You got a high energy. You got an EV or something there? And exactly what you said. He said, no, that's an empty site. So he went out there and checked into it, and the folks next to it had taken a commercial fryer, put a 50 amp plug on it, and they plugged it into the empty site, and they were doing a fish fry. And it was pulling 10,000 watts for 4.5 hours while they were boiling oil. So that's one of the interesting things we've seen out there that we've caught through the high load alerts.
Well, that's an interesting story. Let's see. So I got a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to sort through here. Let's see. We got someone who asked, just in general, in your opinion, is the EV demand greater than the demand for, say, a 45-foot motorhome?
Not necessarily, and that's kind of what I was showing with that Prevost. We've seen those Prevost bus pull the same demand as an EV, and we've seen them trip breakers. So they pull heavy. And it's funny, we've talked to several of the owners of those large Class A's, and they've learned what they can and can't do because they've tripped enough breakers. So we were talking to the one owners, and they said, yeah, we know not to run the dryer at the same time we're cooking on our stovetop, because when we have those two things really pulling a lot for the heating elements, we will trip breakers. I think the difference between the two is that a Class A will not draw as long as an EV. You plug an EV into charge, it may draw for 4, 6, 8 hours, whereas that Prevost is going to draw for half an hour. We've seen a couple hours, but they go to bed and they turn the air's down, the stove's off. It won't draw as long as an EV. It'll draw as hard, but not as long.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Let me just find my next question here. Let's see. So someone asks, if someone has like a short-term stay at a campsite and it exceeds kind of their reservation time period, how do you come up with the rate to charge for that?
Yeah, usually that goes by the checkout. So Gavin or Casey, maybe you can talk about this a little bit about automatic checkouts versus somebody manually checking it out. But the checkout is when that calculation usually occurs, to know what the meter said at checkout time.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. And we'll see if Casey can answer that one in the chat. Let's see. Another question was, okay, we had a question come in. How does ResNexus take your rate to input into the system? For example, in California, we have different rates for low peak, mid peak, etc. And the answer for that is that you will manually set up the rate in ResNexus, and then you're able to set up varied rates for those utilities.
Yeah, and we are actually seeing rates get more complicated. So this is an area that is gonna, take more work on everybody's part to track rates. We also have rebates. So we've seen utilities that for some reason they have to provide a rebate, and then you have to credit that back to the consumer. That's no fun either, trying to figure out who you got to rebate.
Right. Another question, just in general about the utility meters, is how hard is it to install?
Two different answers there. If you have pedestals that already have meter sockets and you have the old, rotary dials, or you're out there manually reading them, it's very simple. You just pop out the old meter, pop in a new one. It's like a plug, very simple.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not have meters, it becomes a little bit harder. You do need an electrician because you have to add a meter socket to the pedestal, and there is some rewiring to do. On that latter example, if you're transitioning from no meters to meters, it's more costly, but the return on that investment is ridiculously short. So because you're now charging for electricity, you're covering that expense and you're covering the cost of putting those meters in. And it's typically 4 to 5 months and you've paid for the metering to be put in.
All right, cool. That sounds pretty straightforward. I think that kind of answers one of our other questions, just asking what the process is for beginning metered electric for a park with existing unmetered pedestals.
Yep, and we can talk through that. If somebody has detailed questions, it does come down to the pedestal type. So there's different sockets for different pedestal types,
Right.
and pretty straightforward. We can answer those questions individually if people can give us equipment types.
Yeah, for sure. Another question we had come in was, for extended stays that are charging electric, how does ResNexus allow for discounts that the guest may qualify for, such as low-income discounts offered by the electric company? Answer for that is, you are able to add the discounts to the reservation at any time to account for the utility discounts your guests may be eligible for. Let's see, someone's asking about the billing automation and prorations for check-in, check-out before monthly billing cycle.
Yeah, that's a good one. You guys can probably answer that better, but typically people that stay multiple months or are long-term, there is a monthly billing period that it does occur even though they have not yet checked out.
Okay. Sorry, I think we're getting to the end of the questions. We've got another one, second half of a prior question. If someone has an EV outlet in, say, their home garage, and the outlet looks identical to a 50 amp RV pedestal, would that person be able to plug their RV into that home garage EV outlet?
Yes, yeah. What they put in homes is the exact same receptacle that's in an RV pedestal. It is that same 50 amp outlet.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's see. I think this is a comment to the story about the fryer. Someone said, just a comment, customers are interesting. You can't make it up.
That's true. So we have found people crypto mining in their RVs. And so for those of you that don't know what that is an RV that is filled to the brim with computers that are just doing calculations. And those computers pull a lot of power. They generate a lot of heat. So then they have a lot of air conditioning to keep that heat down. So we have found a crypto miner or two. We found somebody that was probably doing something illicit with hot lamps in their RVs. So we can spot some of those high load situations.
Right. Always interesting. Someone's asking, what is the approximate cost per meter to purchase?
The approximate cost is about $135 a site for the meter, and then there are receivers. So you need a receiver to pick up all the data. That receiver is right around $1,000, and we need one of those receivers for every 125 sites.
Okay. All right, very good. I think we're coming to the end of our questions here. We'll give it just another minute or two just to see if we can get any more of those answered for you guys. But yeah, so far, yeah, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on here and presenting for us, and did a fantastic job. And I think we all learned quite a bit. Yeah, someone's asking, what other costs are there? Is a monthly cost associated with this?
On the wild energy side, there is, and we have a table that's based on volume. So depending on how many meters are at a campsite, and it looks like it's in the chat there, it averages about $5 per month per meter for that service and the data collection. I should also mention we keep the data for 5 years to help with the month over month, year over year comparisons. And also we do that for regulatory reasons. So if a consumer complained about their energy charge, we have it as a look back. We can go back and see exactly time of day, exactly what they used. It's not a question of the metering anymore because we've recorded everything. And we also do have a portal where the consumer can watch their own meter. So a lot of times they don't trust the meter. You can go right to our portal, you can plug your meter in, and you can see exactly what it's reporting back.
And then another question was just, will this recording be available afterwards? And the answer is yes. The recording of this webinar will be available in about 1 week's time. That'll be available online for you to view on resnexus.com in the webinars section. Let's see. Someone asks, what if my park is only open 5 months out of the year for payments per month?
Yeah.
Like if the RV park is closed.
We do have special things for special pricing for new construction, expansions, and seasonal parks. So the short answer is for seasonal park, we stop billing when they're closed.
All right, fantastic. Thank you again so much. I think we're about to the end of our questions. Thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules. And I think with that being said, everyone just have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye.